Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast, where we talk with the people behind the current events and breakthroughs in brain implants in an understandable way, helping bring together various fields involved in neuroprosthetics. Here is your host, Laden Neurotech.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Neural Implant Podcast. Today's guest is Gautam Sadarangani, and he is the CEO and co-founder of TENZR, TENZR, which is actually a sub-company of BioInteractive Technologies. I'm not exactly sure. I didn't know this initially, but he is developing a technology which is very similar to Control Labs, which was purchased by Facebook before, basically being able to control, devices or VR or anything. Right now, it's more for therapeutic purposes, but it's basically very multifunctional, and it attaches to your wrists and basically measures the activity of the wrist to see where you would be turning your wrist or moving your fingers or something like this. Gautam, pleasure to have you on the show. We've known each other for a while, but I still feel like I didn't describe the company well. And I saw your face when I compared you to Control Labs. Welcome. Thank you for coming on, but let's clear everything up that I just said.
Thanks very much for having me, Laden. And firstly, outstanding pronunciation of my last name, probably better than I did in the first 15 years of my life. So props to you there. Thanks for the introduction. My name's Gautam. I'm one of the co-founders of BioInteractive Technologies, as you pointed out, and we do business as TENZR Health. Interestingly enough, I'm actually the president and COO. I've got a extremely capable co-founder who is the CEO and is based in Seattle. So at TENZR Health, what we do is we're basically combining intelligent sensors, and you spoke to some of our technology development there. I'm happy to get deeper into it, with software and movement analytics to essentially gamify rehabilitation for people suffering from musculoskeletal injuries that require motor re-education. So the idea is to be able to measure what the patient's doing, to be able to provide biofeedback as they complete their exercise program in order to be able to retrain the movement pattern and get rid of the underlying movement impairment. We do that using technology that was developed by us that allows us to very precisely measure what the limb is doing. And I'm happy to get a little bit deeper into that, which is where the Control Labs analogy.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, let's go into that. Let's talk about the technology a little bit. How does it work? Why does it work? And Control Labs, they said that you're able to control things with your mind, and this is something similar.
Yeah, so we think of ourselves more in the movement and muscle measurement space more than the mind reading space, right? The BCI space. At the heart of it, we've got a multi-sensor stack that allows us to measure what the limb is doing very precisely. One of the unique techniques that we use to do that is a technology called force myography, which allows us to measure the movements of the muscles and tendons that sit at a limb surface in order to tell what the limb is doing with the attached appendix. So if you imagine for those who are listening to this, if you imagine grabbing your wrist with your other hand and you sort of wiggle your fingers around, you'll feel your muscles and tendons moving as on your other hand. And that is part of what we measure and part of the proprietary technology that we developed years ago at BioInteractive Technologies that's now being commercialized under the service TENZR Health.
Okay. And how precise is it? And how precise do you need to be for this rehabilitation process?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's precise, but our true core competence is both precision and the fact that we are low profile. Another obvious way to measure the limb is to use a sensing glove, a smart glove of some sort, or to use camera-based systems. So part of our core competence here is the fact that we're able to measure the limb with sufficient accuracy and sufficient resolution for rehabilitation purposes, while being very unobtrusive for the person to wear essentially 24/7. As you pointed out, it's fundamentally a wristband at the moment because we focus on the hand, wrist, and elbow. Eventually, if we move up to the shoulder or down to the ankle, it would still be something unobtrusive around the ankle or something like that. And we essentially provide metrics around how the limb is moving. So we have very big believers in the idea of quality of movement over quantity of movement. But we also don't want to go over precise, right? It's not particularly relevant in the rehabilitation process to get to sub-degree accuracy. What's really important is to be able to track the way the limb is moving and whether the quality of the movement is correct, more so than the precision. And so that's a big part of what we've developed over the years.
Okay. Very cool. So what would be a typical patient and how long would they be using the device? What kind of exercises, what kind of things would they be using? What's a bad outcome that maybe before using your device, and what's a good outcome after using your?
Great question. At the moment, we are dealing with individuals who've got upper extremity injuries. So at the moment, if you've got a hand, wrist, or elbow condition, think of things like carpal tunnel syndrome, tennis elbow, golfer's elbow, maybe some paresis due to stroke, or even something more acute like a wrist fracture or wrist sprain. In most of these conditions, you're going to end up seeking outpatient physical therapy or occupational therapy. And now occupational therapists and physical therapists do great work, and we work very closely with them. But one of the challenges they have is they need to teach their client or the patient how to move appropriately. It's essentially a movement pattern, a rewiring of the movement pattern that's required. And it's really challenging to get that done in a session, even if it's a 1 hour long. And so where we come in is we're able, using our sensory technology, able to measure exactly how the patient is moving. We then are able to gamify the movement exercises the therapist would like to do. So the patients essentially get an instant dopamine hit when they are completing the games, because these exercises are quite boring, to be honest, and quite micro movements, right? This is not, you don't get the endorphin rush after running a marathon when you're doing these exercises that can be painful as well. And so we rewire those movement patterns and then have the patient and the therapist check in again. So you would typically encounter us at your physical therapist, where we would be used in your treatment session itself, and then a kit would be sent home with you, and you would follow along with your exercises for the entire rehabilitation journey. And the second part of your question was what outcomes, what's a good outcome and what's a bad outcome. And what we have found through all of the patients we've spoken with is typically the outcome is without TENZR is you're not quite sure if you've reached your full recovery. You're not sure when you're going to reach your full recovery, and you're not sure if you're doing your exercises correctly and often enough and at the right intensity to reach your full recovery. And so the entire purpose behind this is to take away all of that uncertainty. And so we know we're able to tell the patient exactly where they are in their recovery journey, whether that 15 to 20 minute rehab session they're doing was giving them all the bang for their effort that they deserve. And I'm delighted to say that we have been treating patients commercially out here in Canada. And we've actually seen that on average, most patients recover from their entire underlying condition in between 2.5 to 3 months while on the platform in partnership with the physical therapist.
And how long is it normally again?
So it's really hard to say what it would be. It's a really wide gamut, but if you ask me anecdotally, what we've heard is somewhere between 3 to 6 months. And here, because you're making sure you're continuing to follow along the program, you've effectively driven up compliance, we're seeing patients recover in 2.5 to 3 months. But this is what we're observing as we are providing this system commercially. It's not a control trial or anything along those lines.
So this really reminds me, I don't know if you heard about this. There's this program called 40 Years of Zen. And basically they are able to measure meditation. And because meditation, same thing, it's very nebulous. People are like, am I doing it correctly? And it might take years to figure out if you're doing maybe that time doing it incorrectly. And they actually do the same thing. And they actually measure your brain waves to make sure that you are actually meditating and meditating correctly. And maybe you could meditate like 10% better or something like that. So this sounds very similar to this. Yeah, this is very exciting.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in and say I totally agree. Another company that does a similar thing is a company called the Muse headband, which is, again, trying to get you that biofeedback and let you know if you're moving in the right direction. And that's a big part of our ethos. Absolutely.
Yeah. Definitely. And so you guys are a startup and you guys have raised money. How far along in the process are you? And what does the next 5 years look like?
Yes. So we're a Series Seed startup operating at the moment out of Canada. So we've been around for about 5 years, but the first 3 and a bit years was purely on technology development. So we have, as we spoke about briefly, a proprietary sensing technology that allows us to any limb of interest, but at the moment, the hand, wrist, and elbow with more precision and more clinically relevant measures than anything that we've encountered out there. We then began a limited commercial launch at the beginning of this year, early this year, to roll out the TENZR Health service in select clinics in BC. And we're trying to be very slow and deliberate to make sure that we not only to make sure that the quality is high, but to make sure we're also able to learn and operationalize it appropriately. And so at the moment, we're available in BC and slowly rolling out to the rest of Canada. You encounter us either at a therapist's office, or if you're in Canada, you can actually go to our website and request access that way. And we connect you with a partner therapist that we have in your local community. And so we've got some in British Columbia, Canada, some in Alberta, and some in Ontario, Canada. And then our plans in the near future to enter the United States, sometime early next year, we expect to be available in the US market. And the long-term trajectory of the company, as I've indicated, is effectively to provide patients and therapists with the motivation, the certainty, and the clinical expertise that they need in order to reach their fullest possible recovery. And to do that, what we believe is necessary is to continue to innovate in terms of the type of clinical parameters we measure, to be able to measure things beyond just range of motion, for example, which is something very common in the physical therapy world, to start measuring things like strength, endurance, proprioception, control, so that we can really help therapists rehabilitate patients as quickly as possible.
Okay. Yeah,
as effectively as possible.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and then I remember we talked before, and you had a very interesting story how you came into this. You grew up in Singapore, but also you worked at a company, a different company before working here. Do you want to talk about both of those things?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for the question. So my personal story is, I grew up in Singapore, moved to Canada, which is where I'm located now, for my university degree. And halfway through my university degree, decided to get really healthy. So I ended up losing about 150, 170 pounds. So the joke is I'm half the man I used to be when I was a teenager, and just got really obsessed with biomedical sensing and tracking, because the thing that worked for me after years of failed attempts was heart zone training. So running on the treadmill at basically the cardiovascular and briefly the aerobic zone. And so I realized that if we're able to produce technologies that allow individuals to measure what they are doing and provide guidance on how the activities that they're doing leading to the desired outcome, people can get empowered and can achieve great things. And so I got really obsessed with biomedical engineering, and then ended up after college joining a company called Lung Pacer Medical that was a Vancouver-based company that's now located in the United States that does transvenous phrenic nerve pacing systems. It's one of the first few employees at the company when they were first starting up, and it was a phenomenal experience. Grew with the company over the years as we went through the FDA's Breakthrough Devices program. And at all times was also really obsessed with physical therapy and being able to measure movement, partly because my mother's an occupational therapist. And so I knew this was a big problem that needed to be solved as well. And after a really great stint at Lung Pacer, decided to venture out on my own and to start working on what we're doing here at TENZR Health.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And it seems like you guys are doing a good job in helping people and helping out with their physical therapy journey as well. But yeah, very cool. Another thing too, I've mentioned it a little bit on the show, but I started like a peer support group, Mastermind, for Neurotech entrepreneurs, Neurotech leaders, CEOs, just like yourself. And I think this is going to be too late. This will be published too late for the next cohort. But if people are interested, what's that been like? And what's your experience been when being in the group? I think it's been now 3 or 4 months in the group.
Yeah, it has. My experience has been overwhelmingly positive. It's really, so the thing that's interesting is, as the cliche goes, startups are hard. They're exciting, but they're hard. And when you're dealing specifically in the medical devices industry, and then when you go beyond that into the neuro space itself, the layers of complexity and the nuance increases as well. And so having access to a group of people, all impressive in their own right, dealing with similar but not the same set of problems at different stages in their various entrepreneurial journeys, and just having the ability to bounce ideas back and forth with each other has been really great. And the fact that you're able to locate individuals that are that sort of work well together and at the same stage is, I think, a big part of why it's been so successful.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I do filter it for people that are in your situation or your size and that kind of trajectory, and also filter it for personality, making sure that no dickheads allowed.
That's a good rule in life in general.
Exactly. And it is very difficult because in neurotech, it's medical devices and everything like this, and there's just so many moving parts. And the person who's choosing to use a thing is different than the person who approves it, who is different from the person who pays for it, is different from. There's 4 different basically decision makers in this tree. And so it's just so many things that have to be taken into account. So it's not like McDonald's selling hamburgers. It's much more nuanced and complicated than that. There's definitely is a big dance to that. Congratulations on you for being able to do this. And I know that you guys have been having good progress in this, and I think you're moving forward. So it's very good. So Gautam, I think this has been excellent. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I guess I'll leave with a summary statement, if I may. At the heart of it, if you've got any one of the injuries that we're dealing with today, things like carpal tunnel, tennis elbow, golfer's elbow, wrist fracture, tendonitis of the wrist, or even something more on the stroke, traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury side that leads to wrist injury, you're going to end up in a physical therapist's office. When you do that, part of what the physical therapist challenge is going to be is to teach you how to move appropriately. And so we believe that our sensing system that allows us to very accurately measure what you're doing and quantify your recovery, combined with our approach of gamifying those movement exercises that you need to do, gets the patient the motivation and the certainty they need to stick with their recovery program and recover more effectively, quicker, and all feel completely empowered and in control of the situation as they're going through it. As you mentioned, we have rolled it out in a limited setting at the moment and are continuing to expand, but the initial feedback's been phenomenal. We've had several patients recover in about 2.5 to 3 months. And the thing that's most gratifying for us is when you survey these patients about how they felt through the entire program, the fact that there's this certainty in the overall recovery journey has been a big part of it. And that's really gratifying.
Yeah, definitely. You can have a score and maybe have an all-time high score user and feature them or something like that.
Absolutely. Exactly. It's quantifying and motivating. It's a big deal. It's no different than when you're trying to lose weight. You want a weighing scale. Like, you need those parameters to tell you if you're moving in the right direction, because let's face it, for the first 3 to 4 weeks, you might not see anything. And that's the point. These things take time. And they take nuance, and having sensors help you there is a big part of any recovery journey, whether it is in the MSK space, which is where we operate, or whether it was for me when I was trying to lose.
Yeah, definitely. Same thing. We pulled out the scale, I think this morning actually, and it was like, oh, shoot, I'm 10 pounds heavier than I want to be. But as they say, what gets measured gets improved. And so now that it's like a target, then I can lose those extra 10 pounds, which for me is actually pretty easy. But yeah.
And have fun doing it. That's where the gamification comes.
Exactly. Gautam, I think this has been excellent. Yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hope you enjoyed the show and were able to learn something new, bringing together different fields in novel ways. Until next time on the Neural Implant Podcast.